In the spring of 1945, as the war in Europe reached its devastating climax, German tank crews faced a nightmare they could not fight their way out of. From the ruins of Cologne to the encirclement of the Ruhr, they watched in disbelief as endless columns of American armor advanced relentlessly, seemingly immune to losses. While every German vehicle destroyed became an irreplaceable void, Panthers, Tigers, and Panzer-I masterpieces of engineering were burned, abandoned, or cannibalized for scraps, while Americans replaced hundreds of Shermans within days. The scale of industrial production became the ultimate weapon. German craftsmanship clashed against American assembly lines, where quantity proved to be a brutal form of quality. By March 1945, Germany could no longer compete. For every tank they lost, 10 were waiting for the Americans. The human cost, the lost cities, and the psychological blow were staggering. But the lesson was clear. In modern warfare, it is not the brilliance of a single machine but the unstoppable output of industry that decides victory. From Bartelberth's burned Panther in Cologne to the abandoned Tiger II in the Ruhr, the story is one of courage, overwhelmed by production, skill undone by numbers, and a military collapse dictated not by tactics but by factories. March 6, 1945, 1,430 hours. Cologne, Germany. The Panther tank's 75mm gun turned toward the approaching American armor. Oberleutnant Wilhelm Bartelberth gripped the commander's cupola, his knuckles pale against the cold metal. Through the periscope, he counted the Sherman tanks moving through streets littered with rubble. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He stopped at 12. More tanks emerged from the smoke behind them, an endless wave of American steel rolling toward the Rhine. His gunner, Unritzia Gustav Schaefer, called up from below, disbelief cracking his voice. Oberleutnant, more coming from the west. How many tanks do they have? The air reeked of burning oil and cordite. Bartelberth climbed down from his turret, boots crunching on the shattered cobblestones of Cologne's former commercial district. Around him, Panzer Brigade 106 Feldhalle sat idle, not from battle damage but empty fuel tanks. 17 Panthers, 9 Panzer IVs, 38 half-tracks, all reduced to motionless hulks. Through the morning haze, he could see the American assembly near the cathedral. They hadn't bothered to hide their vehicles. Parked openly like a motor pool on a Sunday, mechanics tinkering casually, crews brewing coffee atop tanks. The metallic clang of tools on armor echoed over the ruins. Rows of Sherman tanks, tank destroyers, and self-propelled guns lined up like products off a factory line. Hundreds in total. His brigade had begun Operation Watch on the Rhine with 89 tanks. After 3 months of combat, only 26 remained operational. The Americans in front of him had lost 23 Shermans that morning alone, yet pressed forward as if losses were irrelevant. Bartelberth moved slowly, almost hypnotized. His adjutant Obersturmführer Karl Sittlerman peered through captured American binoculars and counted aloud, 217 tanks. Oberleutnant, just here. Sweat dotted Zimmerman's forehead. Despite the March cold, as he watched more tanks arrive via pontoon bridges, as his men observed the Americans prepare for the final push into Cologne, Bartelberth walked among the abandoned German vehicles. Realizing the Americans had more tanks in a single square kilometer than the entire 5th Panzer Army had received as replacements in 6 months. Standing amid this display of industrial power, watching American tankers smoke casually atop their vehicles, a crushing truth hit him. If the Americans could mass such numbers for a single city, the war was effectively over. 4 months earlier, in November 1944, Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, had presented the Führer a report that should have ended all offensive operations. German tank production peaked at roughly 1,800 vehicles in December 1944. Impressive given bombing and material shortages, but the numbers foretold defeat. Allied intelligence estimated U.S. tank production far exceeded Germany's, with Soviet output even higher. The Allies reportedly built over 4,000 tanks monthly, while Germany struggled to produce 150, attempting mechanized warfare with artisanal methods. Hand files and hammers still echoed in German factories, each tank requiring custom fitting. Major Friedrich Stearman of the Wehrmacht's Ordnance Department calculated that constructing a single Tiger demanded tens of thousands of man-hours. Meanwhile, at Chrysler's Detroit Arsenal, the assembly line ran continuously stamp weld, rivet, repeat day, and night. By March 1945, American factories had built around 49,000 Shermans, thousands more as variants, sent 8,000 to the Soviets, supplied the British armored forces, and had enough to replace battlefield losses within days. Wilhelm Bartelberth, 34, a veteran of Kursk and Normandy, holder of the Honor Roll clasp, knew the importance of numbers in modern warfare. His leather uniform bore oil stains, elbows worn from hours over map tables planning disparate operations. His Panzer Brigade had been the Western Front's crisis response unit, rushing from one emergency to another. On March 3, 3 days before Cologne, Bartelberth attended a briefing at Field Marshal Walter Model's headquarters. The bunker thick with smoke and tension, Model spoke plainly. "Gentlemen, we face an enemy who can lose 100 tanks one day and field 150 the next." Panzer Brigade 106 was allocated 12 replacements for March for Panthers. 8 Panzer IVS, half rebuilt from scavenged wrecks. As his column prepared to defend Cologne on March 5th, Bartelberth issued urgent orders. Every vehicle dug in as a static defensive position. Mobile defense, the essence of panzer warfare, was now impossible. That morning, Colonel John Smith, of the U.S. 3rd Armored Division, recorded new reinforcements, 35 M4A3E8 Shermans with 76mm guns, 12 M18 Hellcats, 8 M36 Jacksons more than lost the previous week. March 6, 08:00 hours. The American attack began with artillery shaking, the ground beneath Bartelberth's boots. Even the cathedral trembled. American tanks fired at anything that could conceal an enemy. At Cathedral Square, Bartelberth's Panther waited in ambush, hull down behind rubble, turret, and gun exposed. The first Sherman appeared at 14:50 hours, commanded by 2nd Lieutenant Karl Kellner. Bartelberth's 75mm shell struck, igniting the tank, killing 3 instantly. Yet what followed defied everything he knew. The Americans pushed the burning Sherman aside with a dozer tank, metal grinding on metal, and kept advancing. Another Sherman, then another, and according to future testimony by uniform Klaus Muller, we destroyed 3 Shermans in 5 minutes. Perfect kills. The Americans didn't even slow down. It was like trying to stop a river with your bare hands. At 15:03 hours, Bartelberth's Panther faced something new. The approaching tank was larger, heavier, and mounted with a longer gun than any Sherman Bartelberth had seen before. The ground trembled differently under its weight, a deep, resonant vibration that felt almost alive beneath the Panther's treads. He realized immediately that this was no ordinary vehicle. It was an M26 Pershing, the United States' newest, heavy tank, recently deployed in Europe, nicknamed Eagle 7, under the command of Sergeant Robert Early with Corporal Clarence Smoyer manning the gun. Smoyer spotted the Panther first, his eyes widening at the familiar German silhouette. Bartelberth, an experienced commander accustomed to facing countless Shermans, made a fatal misjudgment in that critical moment. Mistaking the Pershing for one of their own advanced tanks, he ordered his gunner to hold fire. Those few seconds of hesitation were catastrophic. The Pershing's 90mm gun thundered, the first shell smashing into the Panther's side with an ear-splitting clang, the impact reverberating through the hull, rattling equipment and crew alike. The second round ignited the tank in an instant, flames erupting violently, black smoke curling skyward, a dark column against the afternoon sun. Bartelberth and 3 crew members scrambled through the hatches, faces scorched, uniforms singed, coughing from smoke, but their gunner remained trapped inside, consumed by fire. To understand the shock and despair that German tank crews experienced in 1945, one must comprehend the dire state of Germany's armored forces. The Wehrmacht had entered the war with over 3,000 tanks, mostly Panzer I and II models, light and fast, but limited in firepower. By 1945, despite producing increasingly advanced and formidable vehicles, the number of operational tanks across all fronts had dwindled to barely 1,500. The Tiger II, a 70-ton behemoth equipped with the formidable 88mm gun, was a marvel of engineering, yet only approximately 490 had been built due to resource limitations and constant Allied bombing. The Panther, often hailed as the best medium tank of the war, was plagued by chronic transmission failures. Grinding gears and mechanical whining were a relentless soundtrack in German armored units. Of the roughly 6,000 Panthers manufactured, barely 400 remained operational by March 1945. On the home front, German civilians had not seen new tanks or armored vehicles since 1943. As factories had been relocated underground to avoid Allied air raids. The conditions were harsh, damp tunnels, poorly lit, filled with the echoes of forced laborers assembling machines under primitive and grueling circumstances. Workmanship had to compensate for shortages and bomb damage, often requiring precise hand-fitting of parts. Hitler Youth, some as young as 14, trained on wooden mock-ups, gripping painted broomsticks instead of machine guns, simulating combat without ever touching real armor. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the United States approached tank production, like automotive assembly, streamlined and relentless. Factories ran 3 shifts, filled with the smell of fresh paint and machine oil. Assembly lines moving continuously, churning out hundreds of vehicles at a time. Crews trained on surplus tanks. Engines and treads a constant presence from Kentucky to California, instilling a familiarity and efficiency that German forces could not match. With the Pershing's dominance at the Cathedral, Bartelberth, surviving men had no choice but to surrender to advancing American forces. Their uniforms scorched, hands trembling from adrenaline. eyes scanning the streets as more tanks rolled past the burning Panther. Oberleutnant Hans Fischer later wrote to his wife, recounting the surreal scene, in one morning he had seen more American tanks than German forces had witnessed in 2 years of war. Destroy one, and 2 more appeared in its place. Destroy 5, and 10 replaced them instantly. By evening on March 6, American units had cleared most of Cologne west of the Rhine. The cathedral bells, long silent through months of bombardment, would soon ring again, signaling a shift in control. German troops had destroyed 31 American tanks, but within 72 hours, every loss was replaced with improved models. German losses, by contrast, were 26 tanks, all operational vehicles in the sector, irreplaceable and gone forever. On March 8, Colonel Hans von Locke of the 21st Panzer Division arrived at Model's headquarters to report the grim reality. The air thick with the scent of smoke and despair. He described the enemy advance in stark terms. American armor moved in columns of hundreds, almost like a peacetime parade, unaffected by losses. We destroy 10, he reported. They barely notice. We lose 1. It's a catastrophe. Field Marshal Model, staring at maps marked with red pins representing American bridgeheads, saw the Remagen crossing on March 7th. A critical point that had allowed 25 divisions, approximately 5,000 tanks, to pour across the Rhine in days. Model had perhaps 90 operational tanks to defend all of Army Group B. He reportedly told his staff, "Gentlemen, we face an enemy who counts tanks by divisions while we count individual vehicles. Modern war is decided by the most factories." German tank crews, observing the relentless flow of enemy armor, came to the same realization. From the Ruhr to Bavaria, the ground trembled beneath American treads. In Paderborn, Headman Erich Ver of the 57th Heavy Tank Battalion watched as American formations stretched to the horizon, their dust clouds visible for miles. He counted 400 tanks pass a single point in 1 hour, while his battalion possessed only 6 operational Tiger. I is the Americans' advantage lay in mass production, a philosophy Germany never fully embraced. Sherman tanks were simpler and less sophisticated than Panthers, but their design allowed rapid production and easy replacement. Guns were adequate rather than exceptional. Ammunition was unlimited, and spent brass casings littered positions, like autumn leaves, a testament to the scale of output. Colonel James Rose, Chief of Armor Development for the U.S. First Army, wrote in March 1945, "Germans build tanks like Swiss watches. We build them like Detroit trucks, functional, reliable, and produced in unlimited numbers." By late March, as German forces were encircled in the Ruhr pocket, the disparity was absolute. The constant rumble of American engines was inescapable, a relentless mechanical hum that haunted every German defensive position. The U.S. Ninth Army alone fielded over 1,300 tanks, while the entire German Army Group B, numbering 325,000 men, had fewer than 100 operational tanks. At Lippstadt on April 1st, as the encirclement concluded, German officers witnessed a horizon filled with American armor. Major Wilhelm Ritter, of the 116th Panzer Division, observing from a church tower stripped of its bells for the war effort, recalled that they had only 11 tanks hidden in barns. The Americans passed without searching, their numbers so vast that individual German vehicles were irrelevant. Bartelberth, recovering from burns in a field hospital, heard whispered reports of endless American columns of German tanks abandoned due to a lack of fuel, while American engines ran all night to provide warmth for the men. On April 13th, at Cologne, a depot containing 43 damaged Panthers and Tigers awaiting repair was captured intact. The American commander, surveying the stockpile, chose not to secure the tanks, confident that 200 new Pershings would arrive. The following week, illustrating the staggering imbalance of industrial output, by April 14th, German forces began surrendering en masse, while American crews complained of traffic jams caused by the sheer volume of vehicles. The irony was bitter. Germans destroyed tanks for lack of fuel, while Americans were delayed by an overabundance of them. Unritzia Hermann Gross of the 9th Panzer Division described the final days. Only 4 Panthers remained. Magnificent machines, yet with fuel for barely 10 kilometers. While American convoys passed endlessly, engines running constantly, a relentless testament to industrial might and strategic superiority that Germany could no longer match. On April 6, General Gustav von Zangen, commanding the German 5th Army, sent his last message before reporting that they were being crushed under an overwhelming wave of American armor. "We are being buried by an avalanche of steel," he wrote. "The enemy advances with more tanks than we have anti-tank shells. This is industrial extermination." During the battle in the Ruhr, American forces had lost 341 tanks to all causes. Yet within 2 weeks, they had received 500 replacements. The psychological impact on German soldiers was immense, a cruel recognition of their own inadequacy. Friedrich Kau wrote in his diary, "We were told we were the master race. Then I saw American tank parks with more vehicles than our entire army. They had tanks they weren't even using. just held in reserve. Hitler, informed of the collapse on April 17, refused to face reality. When shown aerial reconnaissance photos of the American assembly areas, he reportedly insisted they were inflatable decoys. Lower-ranking commanders, however, knew the truth. Weeks earlier, General Heinz Guderian had warned Hitler, noting that Americans were producing more tanks in a single month than Germany had managed in an entire year. The Ruhr pocket surrendered on April 18, resulting in 317,000 prisoners, many of them veterans like Bartlebirth who had glimpsed the future of warfare and understood their era had ended. Field Marshal Model, rather than surrender, took his own life in a forest on April 21, reportedly telling his aide, "What is left for a defeated general?" In prison camps, the air was thick with the smell of defeat, unwashed uniforms, alcohol for medical use, and resignation. German tank crews had time to reflect on the futility of their struggle. Oberst Heinrich von Stein told interrogators, "You want to know about our tactics? Excellent. Our tanks were superb. Our crews the best trained. None of it mattered. You built tanks like newspapers, daily, in impossible numbers." Major Robert Allen recorded a revealing conversation with von Manstein, who recalled that he knew the war was lost in March 1945, west of Cologne. "I saw American maintenance units discarding entire engines because it was easier to install new ones. We were scavenging wrecks for single bolts. That's not war. That's two completely different worlds colliding." The knowledge of industrial disparity spread through the camps. Even Bartlebirth, recovering from severe burns, understood the numbers. By the war's end, the United States had produced roughly 88,000 tanks and self-propelled guns. In the European theater alone, 16,000 tanks had been deployed, with another 8,000 in the Pacific. The most striking statistic was production efficiency. German factories required hundreds of thousands of man-hours to build a single King Tiger, while Americans produced 3 Shermans in the same period. Dr. Karl Müller, a German economist, calculated that by March 1945, American tank production capacity exceeded Germany's by a factor of 42-1. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, American forces found 2,100 abandoned German tanks, while the U.S. Army already had 11,000 operational tanks in Europe, and was shipping older models to scrapyards. General George Patton, inspecting a captured factory where Bartlebirth's Panther had been built, remarked, "The Germans built better tanks. But we built tanks better." Years later, in 1965, Gustav Schaefer, Bartlebirth's gunner, survived the war and reflected on the experience, hands still marked by old burns. He said, "People ask about tank battles, tactics, and courage. I tell them we lost the moment." American factories started producing tanks like sausages. Every Tiger took 6 months to build. Every Sherman took 3 hours. The lesson was brutal. In industrial warfare, the country with the most factories wins. Germans built the best tanks. Of World War II, Americans built the most. The Panther tank still stands in a Cologne museum, meters from where Bartlebirth made his final stand. Visitors ask why such a remarkable machine was defeated. The answer lies not in the tank itself, but in the production statistics displayed. Behind it, Germany built 6,000 Panthers, America nearly 50,000 Shermans. In 1975, a U.S. Army Armor School study concluded German tanks achieved a 3.5 to 1 kill ratio against American armor. Yet this advantage was meaningless because the Americans had a production ratio of 10 to 1. Colonel David Browning, who led a Sherman platoon through Germany, wrote, "We knew our tanks were inferior. We knew German crews were better trained. We also knew we'd have new tanks tomorrow, and they wouldn't." The post-war irony was complete. German designers, recruited by NATO, praised the mechanical brilliance of German tanks while acknowledging their inability to be mass-produced. Dr. Ferdinand Porsche admitted, "We designed tanks to win battles. The Americans designed tanks to win the war." That morning in Cologne, when Bartlebirth saw the endless columns of American armor and realized victory was impossible, the same revelation occurred across Germany in the spring of 1945. Officers everywhere recognized they were not fighting an army but an industrial machine. They were craftsmen confronting automation, representing the past while the future surged forward with limitless tanks. The last German tank factory produced its final Tiger II on March 26, 1945. That same day, American factories rolled out 67 Sherman tanks, 23 tank destroyers, and 41 self-propelled guns. The final Tiger II never saw combat, abandoned just 20 kilometers from the factory due to lack of fuel. The Americans who captured it did not move it. They had more than enough tanks already to